Hi guys, my name's Brian. I'm a science teacher. I'm a recovering addict who has been on and off of benzos and opioids for 15, almost 20 years at this point, and I'm currently tapering off of methadone, which I mentioned because as I'm getting further along in that process, I'm experiencing a lot of insomnia. It's currently resolved into a pattern where I'm completely sleepless every other night, and last night was one of the bad insomniac nights. So if I seem, a little bit off kilter, or my delivery is a little bit, not so enthusiastic, or I trip over my tongue a little bit more, I am asking for a little bit of grace, which you guys have for the most part been so kind about. And I promise you it won't be like this forever. And I think low key it will be so cool to see 6 months from now, if I stay on track, you will see a new Brian who is at the same time sort of like the old Brian in the best sense. And to have seen me start here and end up there will be incredible. So I think there will be value to starting where I am now, even though it can be a little bit uncomfortable, both for me and for the viewers. So I'm going to get right to the point today because what I have to talk about is really one of the most sinister, alarming topics that I've said anything about since I started my addiction and recovery blog, which is called the Concrete Confessional Blog, about a year and a half ago at this point. Okay, so the TLDR is that through my blog's contact form, I was approached by a young woman who had met this guy while she was trying to order drugs on the dark web, and basically he ended up giving her both money and opioids to use those drugs intravenously while he was video chatting with her, and he pushed her more and more so that she was using to the point of overdose. And I will get into the details because the devil is very much in the details in this story, and it is one of, as I said, the sort of scariest stories that I've heard about these really sinister digital interactions. Like, it really stayed with me, and the more I talked to Cassie, which is what I'm calling her today, obviously not her real name, and the more I thought about it afterward, the more I realized, like, this is incredibly scary behavior, in the sense that if this guy is doing this with her now so confidently and with such an established procedure, there is every chance that he has done this with other people before, which he has flat out told Cassie, and there's a very high chance that he's engaged in harm of other vulnerable populations too. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but that is the TLDR. And again, I want to get the warning out about this, and I want to put out the information so that if this has happened to other people, hopefully they'll get in touch and we can potentially even alert law enforcement to what's going on, because it's serious, okay? So the first thing I want to talk about is what is the dark web, because depending on your level of technological proficiency, you might even not know what I'm referring to when I say that. So there are basically two domains of the internet. One is the clear net. So those are all of the sites, the resources that come up, say, in a Google search for whatever term you're looking for. But there are also unlisted websites called, they're part of a shadow network called the dark web. And the dark websites are typically accessed using a browser called Tor. First of all, you need that browser to access these onion sites, I think is the extension for most of these sites. So a standard browser won't be able to connect with them necessarily. And secondly, you need that to obscure your location, your personal data, to make sure that you have the security, because a lot of times, as I'll talk about it just in 1 second here, if you're going on the dark web, it's with nefarious intent. Not always, but a lot of the time. So again, you need a special browser to access these sites, and the dark websites are not listed in search engines like Google, which only include ClearNet results. So we're on the ClearNet on YouTube, obviously, and 99.9% of your website-based interactions have probably been with ClearNet sites, unless you are pretty of advanced technological competence, or have a lot of or have one, let's just say, niche interest where there's a lot of dark web involvement. All right, so what do you find on the dark web? Well, there is some fairly benign content. And for the record, I've only read about this. I've never used Tor, and I've never actually like bought drugs or anything on the dark web. So what I'm saying is my understanding of how this works, also based on talking to Cassie. But so some of the stuff that you can buy on the dark web that is not so alarming as like you can buy Reddit accounts with a certain amount of karma. You can buy social security numbers and other stolen data from data breaches. You can also buy things like Uber accounts. When you hear that there's like, for example, I think there was like a Somali war criminal driving Uber in Virginia. A lot of times that person might have basically bought an Uber account, an Uber driver's account, that is, through the dark web. Like someone else set it up with a legitimate ID, and that person then bought that Uber driver's account, so that even though they might be in the US in an undocumented situation, or they might have like warrants out for their arrest, even, they can assume the other person's identity and make some income that way. So that's, you can buy data, okay? You can buy accounts that have been aged and that you can use for different purposes like marketing or just, basically anything you can think of. And also, though, it gets a lot more serious than that. You can buy guns. There's a lot of like quote unquote Second Amendment activity through the dark web, based on what I've heard. Although in the US, in some places, it's so easy to buy a gun IRL that it's not even necessary. But the dark web is huge for buying substances that are probably illegal or quasi-illegal. So there was this original site. If you're a millennial like me, you will probably remember Ross Ulbricht, I think his name, or Albrecht. He was a really smart, educated guy who started this dark web site called the Silk Road. And the Silk Road was absolutely the eBay of drugs. There are sites like this to this day, but his was the original. And it was, when I say eBay of drugs, you log in and you see like literally listings for methamphetamine for every pill under the sun. You see they've been branded and marketed in a way that you would expect from like the bougiest, most established brands, right? You see seller ratings, you see reviews. Like it's a very sort of like shiny commercial space, and what you're buying are illegal substances, either pharmaceuticals or just like completely illegal Schedule 1 drugs, from LSD and mushrooms, again, all the way to methamphetamine and Afghani heroin. Again, the branding is incredible, like free trade cocaine. That's not a real example, but it's like that kind of stuff. Like, it is wild what you can find on the dark web substance wise. And I talked about in one of my videos how as we crack down on fentanyl at the southern border particularly, I believe that this group of synthetic opioids called the nitazines, or the benzamidazole, also known as the Frankenstein opioids, are going to become the next battle of the war on drugs. Some of the nitazines are maybe a dozen or more times more powerful than fentanyl even, and I believe that it's going to be the next battle of the war on drugs because they are sourced primarily through the dark web. So it's a very diffuse distribution network that is not nearly as easy to clamp down on as fentanyl, which is still brought through the southern border primarily. So yeah, so you can get drugs on the dark web as well. There are even more sinister things. There are the places, I didn't know if this was urban legend or true, but my understanding is that there really are like red rooms where you can sort of view either pre-made materials or possibly even live materials of people hurting themselves really badly. And there are also, there have been huge federal raids, which you probably heard about, on dark web communities, if you can call them that, dedicated to child abuse of the worst types and abuse of animals. And when people talk about the banality of evil, like I read I think an article in the Atlantic about one of these communities dedicated to abusing children, and these people would log in the chat room and they would like congratulate each other on on someone's promotion at work. They would have totally normal in real life sort of backgrounds, and they would congratulate someone on their promotion, of course not sharing personal details, but the next thing they would be saying is, okay, so this is how you groom a minor, and scare them so badly that even though you're abusing them and they know it's wrong, they will never report you. The transition from this quasi-normal social interaction to shockingly illegal and predatory content, it's like they're approached on the same level, like with the same lightness. Like, one of the most disturbing articles I've ever read. I might, if I can find that article, I'll link it below, but if not, that is the level of evil. It really is evil that is represented on the dark web in its worst form. All right. So I am the most important thing to me as a content creator with a very modest platform are the daily interactions with my readers, with my viewers. Like, just as a kind of cool example, in the first weeks, well, maybe months of my blog, through Instagram, I had someone get in touch with me. He was a Danish rock star with like 20K Instagram followers and a really established brand. I think they had a Sony distribution deal at one point. Like the top band in the Netherlands and one of the top bands in Europe for their niche of rock. He was getting in touch with me because he was either on vacation in Spain with his wife and young kid. He's a family guy, super genuine, cool guy, but either on vacation or on tour or both. And he was going through oxy withdrawal cold turkey. He had a pharmaceutical, so a prescribed oxy habit, and he was going through cold turkey withdrawal for the first time. He had gotten in way over his head without realizing it, and I was talking him through it every single night because he was at his wit's end. He had to talk to his wife about it while seeming normal for his son. He had all these musical obligations, and like to be there for people in extremis, which I am basically 2 or 3 times a week minimum. I joke that I'm like a recovery doula, a free recovery doula. That kind of interaction is what I show up for online. For most of my life, I have had next to no social media presence, but that is what I'm here for. The interactions in the community matter to me exponentially more than like just some vanity metric like getting hundreds of thousands of views. So yeah, so I've met some incredible people, some beautiful people, some selfless people, and people with the most intriguing, interesting stories and complex personalities. So, all right, without getting too much off track, Cassie was one of those people. She got in touch with me first a few months ago, and we didn't start off talking about what I'm about to relay to you. We started off talking about, she started talking to me about nitazines and if I had ever looked into people ordering opioids through the dark web. And we basically started messaging through WhatsApp at her request, and she started getting comfortable with me, and that's when she started to tell me this story. Okay, so without getting into her personal information, I'm really hopeful, by the way, that at one point Cassie will consent to an anonymized interview for this channel where her voice and face are disguised, but she can tell the story herself. Okay, but basically, just so you have a general idea of who she is. She has an office job. She has an undergrad degree, and she works in an administrative capacity in, again, a white-collar job in a city in the Pacific Northwest, 6 or 7 years younger than me, and we've video chatted twice, and she is, you would never guess that she's struggling with what she's struggling with, which is fentanyl addiction, which she started relatively recently. I think it's been 4 or 5 years for her, and which has almost claimed her life. So she's been on and off with buprenorphine maintenance, and she was struggling at this point that the story that I'm about to tell you starts. So she had been, buying drugs through a friend, and that friend got locked up. So all of a sudden she was without a hookup, and she was able to find stuff on the streets of the city that she was on, but it was super risky, and she was so worried about getting arrested and losing her job. So basically she knew that you could get drugs online if you knew how to use the dark web, and she went to a Reddit forum, and she started, it was a Reddit forum that kind of under the table allowed discussion of how you actually, it was sort of a way for people who didn't know how to access the dark web to learn how they could get to these eBay of drugs type sites, like the modern Silk Road type sites. So when she was looking for that information, this guy messaged her, this guy who said that his name, we'll say he said his name was Mark, okay? And Mark was super, super helpful, okay? So he told Cassie, like, I've been an older brother before for people who are buying from these vendors for the first time. Like, yeah, most of them, even the sellers with the high like trust ratings, like they are reliable, but you need to know how this works or you could get taken advantage of. So he walked her through how to download Tor. He walked her through what were reliable sites. He walked her through how to make sure that none of her personal data was linked to her purchases. So for example, how to use Bitcoin to make sure that she wasn't linking any of her banking information and that kind of thing. So he was incredibly helpful. And she said he just seemed like exactly what he said he was, like an older brother or almost like a dad who was just trying to make sure she didn't get hurt or screwed over, and he helped her order fentanyl through the dark web. And it it was superior in terms of quality to what she had gotten before, and it was cheaper than what she had been buying on the street. So this was what she considered a huge favor. So she and Mark were communicating, which I think they were using WhatsApp too early on in their communications, but I'm not 100% on that. And at one point, Mark was, she thought, she started getting the vibe that he might be romantically interested in her. He asked her if she had ever cammed. And right away, she thought that he meant like sexy webcamming, And she said like, oh, that's not my thing. She had actually considered it at one point and said like, no, it could ruin my career prospects forever. So she thought that's what Mark meant, and Mark was like, that's actually not what I mean at all. So now he tells her this incredibly unlikely story, and she said, and I said from the very beginning that this is BS. There's no way this is true. So what Mark said was that he's a recovering opioid addict. He doesn't use anymore, but he gets a real thrill out of seeing other people heavily intoxicated on opioids, especially because he was an IV drug user. He got a huge thrill out of watching other people like get out all their paraphernalia and, cook the shot up, mix the shot up, and then inject. And so he said he likes to watch people do that, especially if it's like a pretty younger girl, and especially to see them under the influence and just enjoying themselves. He said that's how he gets his kicks these days, right? So this, if you guys don't have a background in addiction, this is total falsehood. Like if you're in recovery, that is probably one of the most triggering things that you can see early on in recovery. People go to great lengths to avoid seeing other people under the influence of their drugs of choice. If you are, say, really tired one day, maybe your rehab gave you a sleeping medication like trazodone that knocked you out, and so you're nodding off in group, the counselors will make you leave because that is so uncomfortable for the sedative addicts or the opioid addicts in the session, right? It's incredibly triggering. No one in recovery would do that. So this story from the beginning doesn't pass the smell test. But what Mark tells Cassie is that, this is how he gets his kicks now. And if she wants to make some extra money, she could just use in front of him. She's doing it anyway. And he'll give her some money and maybe even hook her up with some stuff. So, all right. So they agree to a Skype session, and Cassie, so he says he'll pay, he doesn't pay in advance at the first time, and Cassie uses in front of him. And so she just does her normal amount. They talk a while beforehand. Again, she's getting kind of a flirty vibe from him. She thought in the beginning, she said that he might have been making that stuff up. She almost got like a geeky vibe from him, that he was trying to come up with a reason to keep interacting with her. So like he was so desperate, and he figured this was her thing. She's an addict, right? So he'll like engage with that, and then he'll find a way, he'll find a way to give her some money without asking her to just strip, right? Which she could take as like very I don't know, objectifying or condescending, and this would keep him in her life somehow. So that's what she thought was actually going on. And the first time she uses her normal amount, and they just chat. It's like a quasi flirty chat, and she gets a little bit, she's under the influence of opioids, which if you guys have never seen an addict under the influence of opioids, it's not like someone being really drunk where they're obviously impaired. Like if you take enough opioids, and especially if you're tired or your tolerance isn't high, you will nod off. You'll start doing like this kind of thing, or if it's worse, you'll do the fentanyl shuffle and just kind of bend over and not get back up. But in general, if you have tolerance, you're going to be bright, you're going to be, talkative, and you might even be a little bit energized. So that was the vibe of the first session. And he actually ended up, remember, she can use Bitcoin now, and he ended up Bitcoining her, I think the equivalent of like, 60 or 75 bucks after the first time. And she was really skint at that point. So really thanked him for the money. She said she liked to talk to him, and she was trying to, keep him on the line. So she actually reached out to him and asked if he wanted to do it again. And I don't know exactly how much later this was, but the whole timeline from the first time she did this to the final time she did this was something like 3 months or 12 weeks, right? So a couple more weeks, she contacts him and she says, hey, Mark, do you want to do that again? And he says like, yeah, that's cool, but like, it would be good if you could do a little bit more this time, So this time she does her first shot, they chat, and then she does another shot. And this time she overshoots it. Remember, she's getting stuff from the dark web now, different, stronger supply. And she said she was, like in and out. Like she remembered at one point she was talking to him, she trailed off, and then like she sort of passed out, woke back up, looked at the time, and like 100 minutes or something had passed, 90 or 100 minutes, and Mark was still there, and when she typed, he responded right away. So now she's wondering, is this maybe more of like a sexual thing, and is he like one of these sleep fetishes or something even worse? Okay, so she's starting to get the true vibe of this, and that time he sent her again like eventually he sent her like 75 or 100 bucks. I don't remember the exact breakdown, but anyway, so she's getting this reinforced again, and he was much happier that time. He said like he's talking to her like, babe, you are really you're so good at this, you're so beautiful, I love seeing you do what makes you happy, and like just some really sick language around that. And she is getting more skeeved out, and again she's starting to see this for what it is. So there were 2 more times, and the third time I think it was that they did this, Mark actually, without telling her much beforehand, brought another person in. The other thing I should mention is Mark never used his voice. This is all, when I say he says this or he says that, he's typing. Okay, so he 2 things happened. He invited a friend and told Cassie about that right before the session, so she felt like pressured. She couldn't really say anything, and now there were 2 people watching her. Mark had never shown his face, of course, and either did this other guy who said his name was Alan. They were both just typing and not showing their faces. And this time, Mark offered not just to give her Bitcoin to order the Fent from the dark web, but he said he had a really good supplier who wouldn't sell to just anyone who approached him because he was afraid of getting busted even on the dark web. But Mark knew, how to get in touch with him, and he could actually send it to Cassie's address. So Cassie had said that Mark had asked for her address before because he said, look, I'm like overdose prevention. If I see you go down, just give me your address and I can call in and, and make sure an ambulance gets to you. And she declined the first time that he asked for her address for obvious reasons. She doesn't want to end up with a stalker or something, although she always got the impression from his typing and stuff that he might be foreign. She thinks to this day that he might not reside in the US, and she thinks his first language is probably not English, but wherever he's from. But anyway, she denied the request for her address the first time around, but the second time around, when he's offering her like more in a package of Fent than she has been able to buy for like quite a while, she just gives into the addictive impulse and lets him send it. Okay, and she said it's of the same caliber as the stuff she'd been getting from this other dark web vendor, so very good stuff that was again superior to what she had originally been getting on the street. So all right, so this time 2 of them are watching her, and she injects, and again it's a 2-shot kind of deal, and the second time she does it, she goes under right away, and she is under for something like 3 or 4 hours. When she comes back, Mark and Alan, or whatever he said his name was, Alec or Alan, are not in the chat, and no one has called an ambulance or anything. She said when she stood up and went over to the mirror, she was so cyanotic, her whole face was blue. She said like her lips were blue, and she had circles under her eyes that were this bright blue that she had never seen before. It almost looked like she had been punched or something. So she was in a bad overdose, and she doesn't have the chat records, but I asked her sort of like line by line, could you recreate these chats, what they were like for me? And they were like urging her on. Okay, so they're telling her like, oh, like show us the bags, like, oh, you're only doing 3 bags, like you did that last time and it hardly hit you, like, add another 2 bags and we'll give you $50 at the end of the night, an extra 50 bucks, right? Like, yeah, we got you high, but we'll give you a little cash bonus too. Like, they are really egging her on. And again, now they've got her address because it's been shipped there, and Mark is telling her, look, if you go down, like, you're doing something for me, I'm enjoying this, I'm obviously going to call the ambulance, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. So she goes down for 3 or 4 hours. She is badly overdosed. They're not in the chat room when she comes back around, and she is totally skeeved out at this point. She really regrets that she had given her address. She starts to get really paranoid around that. So they're still chatting on WhatsApp in between interactions, between these first 3 times with her showing herself on video. And she starts getting really paranoid. So Mark asks her at one point if she'll do another show for him and for this Alan guy, and she says no. And he says, why? And she says, I'm just not comfortable with that. She tells him the truth. I regret giving you my address, and just the whole thing is starting to seem weird to me. I don't know what you're really about. And she even said to him, like, she said, I know there are people who look for like snuff films, and I'm starting to wonder if you actually want something bad to happen to me. And Mark did not like that at all. She said, like, the nice guy persona was pretty quickly switched out for like, well, you said it yourself. I know where you live, and so okay, the final thing is she had actually tried to she was disturbed. Mark had mentioned that he had done this with other people before, and she could tell by how smooth he was, by how practiced his language was, like this was not his first rodeo. So he had even just referenced doing this with other girls. So she wanted evidence of what was happening. She's starting to get the mindset of like, maybe I should go to law enforcement with this to prevent this from happening to other people, because she was starting to see it for what it was. So with her iPad, she tried to record what was happening on her laptop. And her theory is that that night when she passed out during the third video chat session, that that basically something had happened. Maybe she moved the camera a little bit, her webcam on her laptop or something, or just whatever happened, that Mark or Alan saw the iPad in the background and deduced that she was trying to record what was going on in this screen. So the iPad was supposed to be off to the side, right? And so she thought that might underlie the hostility and the sort of like borderline threats in addition to her own change of attitude. So basically she starts getting really paranoid. She is in the supermarket one day, and she has someone following her around. It's the supermarket right by her apartment building. It's like the only one on her block, and she starts wondering, are they having someone come to intimidate me, to show me that they can get to me in person? Like she was terrified. She's also having some health problems, and she ends up being hospitalized, and they tell her, the doctors don't know to this day exactly what happened, and they tell her that she has evidence of bone marrow suppression. So almost like you would get in certain kinds of cancer, she has both white cell and red cell counts that are down, and the doctors say it's really strange. She tells them she's an opioid addict. She tells them that of course she doesn't know exactly what's in the drug. She tells them that she's been ordering it online, and that there might be a sketchy supplier involved, and they do a lot of tests for a lot of different like metabolic poisons and stuff like that. They don't find anything. And for the record, she has had anemia in the past, but that was like an iron deficiency kind of anemia that was probably from her period. So like this is very different for her. She freely admits now she doesn't think it was really like a person stalking her in the grocery store, and she doesn't think that the stuff was poisoned, among other reasons, because she doesn't believe it came directly from Mark, for different reasons that are both basically she's just surmising that. She's never gonna know, right? But anyway, those two things got her so paranoid that she was having trouble with her job at this point. She overdosed in the bathroom at work at one point, and so she told them she got on Suboxone maintenance. They were totally supportive of her, but she was still using without her job knowing, and she was considering just going into treatment to try to get away from her apartment because she was that scared of Mark. So they do have a fourth, just her and Mark have a fourth video chat at one point, and it's more like the first time. Like it's very limited. She does a single shot. She tells him she's trying to get clean. She appreciated all his help, but like, she's kind of cutting it off. She tells him she's having health problems. She overdosed really badly, and he seems to take it okay. Like he seems back to kind of his nice guy persona, and doesn't go too far, and it just sort of ends there. So yeah, so she's so paranoid at that point again that she's considering going away to treatment, just get out of her apartment. So basically that is where things were left off between Cassie and Mark. She never talked to Alan directly, and she never hears from or about him again. She hasn't heard from Mark for like 3, 4, maybe even 5 months at this point. Okay, I've been in touch with her again for several months. So when she first approached me with this story, okay, like I take this very seriously. If I'm presenting this to you guys, I am not like, I'm gonna vet this to some extent, and that's not because I think that she was lying. I think she was being very truthful, but she was in active addiction when she approached me, and even though I don't think that she had much incentive to lie, and even though I have a small recovery blog, it doesn't make sense that if she was trying to like go viral or somehow like profit from this on a larger scale, it really doesn't make sense to me that I would be the person that she approached. But I did ask her for some documentation. So she did provide me like redacted health records that showed, established some of what, she was talking to me about. I did ask her about her mental health diagnoses. I asked her if she had any diagnosis that could explain like delusions, or that could involve delusions or paranoia. Felt bad asking that, but like I really wanted to know before I took this too seriously. And she showed me in her medical paperwork the list of diagnoses: opioid use disorder, severe, history of anemia. She had the blood work related to her white cell count being down, and her like hematopoiesis overall for red and white cells being down. So she showed me all of that, and it didn't say anything about, I don't know, schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, or anything else that would explain delusions and paranoia not founded in reality. She also provided me some other documentation or proof that I'm not going to talk about it too much at this point, because again, I am really hoping that I can get her on here to do an interview so that she can tell her own story, which will just inherently be more powerful than me telling it. Okay, so what I tell her is I will do whatever I can, like to put this out there and see if anyone else comes forward, and if maybe we can figure out enough information to take this to law enforcement. She was very adamant that she is not going to go to law enforcement and admit to ordering drugs off the dark web. And I'm not a lawyer, but I can't blame her for that. However, what I did tell her is I'm not a journalist and I don't have the resources to investigate this properly. Okay. So what I said is, can we please, I will mediate this. You don't have to approach the newspaper, which would necessitate using probably an email address or something else linked to an actual identity, probably for them to take us seriously. Ultimately, I told her, you don't have to approach them directly, but can we please approach a newspaper in your area and see if maybe they could conduct an investigation, because they have resources that I can't even dream of. And she was okay with that as long as I was like front manning for it, right? So she gave me, again, some documentation about what had happened, and I approached not the biggest paper in this Pacific Northwestern city that she lives in, but the second biggest paper. And I talked to my friend who's an editor for a well-known publication in the US. He tells me it's very different from pitching an article, which I've done before. He says, you're pitching an investigation, and walks me through everything that I need to know. And I can write a concise professional email and link all the resources, and that's exactly what I did. And we did not hear back. I bumped the email twice, did not hear back, and we both just kind of felt discouraged by that. And so at this point, Cassie and I haven't contacted anyone else. And again, she is very afraid. Like, the most important thing to her is maintaining her work prospects, and she's very afraid that if she gets involved in any kind of formal investigation with law enforcement or with a proper journalist, that eventually her ID could be uncovered. So I totally understand that, and it is not my place to push her boundaries on that. So I ask you guys to respect that as well, of course. So again, I was skeptical in the beginning. For the record, I believe her 100%. Again, we have video chatted, and I believe her to my core. The other thing I'd like to note is that there is a precedent for this. So right now on TikTok, I'm not going to say the name of this creator, because she is, I think she's being exploited. She's an active addiction. I think even though she's making these videos herself, she's being manipulated into doing it, and she's in a state of mind where she doesn't appreciate the consequences. But there's this woman who does tarot readings, and she works at a car dealership, and she is very open about being a fentanyl addict, and she is obviously so impaired that it is outrageous. So she's one of those people nodding off, just slurring her words, nodding off, head goes down out of view, comes up 15 minutes later with a crook in her neck from being nodded out for that long. And people are sending her money, encouraging her to go buy stuff right then. There are people in these sick comments telling her, have your guy come. If you show, or if you let us hear off screen that you're meeting your guy to get more stuff, we'll send you $50. So they're encouraging her to give these tarot readings that are completely incoherent, because she's nodding out so badly. And there are people, out of pure sadistic joy, seeing someone debase themselves and put their life in danger, they're funding this woman's habit to laugh at her. So there's that, okay? And she's not the only example of that, of people giving creators money to get high because they enjoy seeing them make fools of themselves or worse. But if you know anything about eating disorders, you know that there are anorexia fetishists. They pay girls incredible amounts of money, thousands of dollars, to hit certain weight goals, which of course for a severe anorexic is like being paid, to do what you want to do at the core of your being anyway, and giving you an external justification for killing yourself, basically. So there are fetishists, anorexic fetishists, who pay huge amounts of money for girls to lose amounts of weight that put their lives in danger, and that is not a bug. That is a feature. The pleasure, often the sexual pleasure, that these sickos get from doing this is the closer they get to death, the better it is. They're almost like necrophiliacs. They're almost like corpse fetishists. Like they like to see these girls pick things up and pretend, or actually show that they're so weak that they can't even pick up mildly heavy objects and things like that. So that's what this reminds me of. This is someone getting pleasure, very likely a sexual pleasure, from seeing someone not only degrade themselves, but seeing someone get closer and closer to death. I know I've heard before that true snuff films, they do exist. We have that like axe murderer guy, the histrionic personality disorder guy who wanted to be on a reality TV show, who killed a guy up in Canada. If you guys heard about that, I don't remember the name, but you probably remember the case if you're in my generation. So snuff films do exist, but I always thought they were almost like just an urban legend. But the people who fetishize near-death states and states where the person actually does cross over, they exist, okay? So that is more support for the idea that this is legitimate. And if anyone sees this video and has had a parallel experience, especially if you recognize anything about the way that Cassie was approached and the way that this evolved, if you get in touch with me, I can give you more specific information with Cassie's permission about how the communications went down, about usernames, about specific language that was used. I don't want to release that all now because people could make up stories and then I won't be able to tell whether people are honest or not, And again, I believe I have a sort of moral or an ethical duty to vet to the best of my ability the information that I'm passing on. But if you're out there and you hear this and someone has approached you or you've done this kind of thing with someone, please get in touch. My email address is in my YouTube channel information. I check it and respond to everyone every 24 hours. You can also get in touch with me through the Concrete Confessional Blog contact form. So I know as addicts, we don't trust law enforcement, and I will not ever pressure anyone to contact law enforcement. But if this is happening and this guy is taking, or potentially multiple people are taking advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, especially like women who might be even younger, who are in extremis and active addiction, I believe we should get in touch with law enforcement. And anyone who is afraid that if they get in touch with law enforcement, their privacy will go out the window, I will be the middleman, okay? I will make sure that there is nothing in what we pass on that could be traced back to you. And no matter what they say to me, I will not, I will not disclose any information that I happen to know about where you live or what age you are or any incidentals that happen to come up in the course of our conversation. So this is some sick shit. And again, the more I thought about it, the more it stayed with me that, like, again, that is the banality of evil, that this is probably a person with a fairly normal life as far as we know, who comes across as normal socially at first, who gets a thrill out of encouraging people to just to destroy themselves. So again, I have so much going on with the channel right now. I don't want this video to get too long, but I've got upcoming content about that clinic in Florida, which I've been in touch with someone who's a whistleblower, multiple people who've worked with them in different capacities, former patients. I believe that clinic in Florida, that we can and will get them shut down through the Attorney General, that they might even be the two doctors running it, even though they're not licensed to practice medicine in the US, that they might even be prosecuted criminally. It is the worst case of addiction treatment fraud and deception and dangerous practices that I've ever seen or heard of in the United States. So I've got more content coming on that, but I am holding off on talking about that clinic again until I'm ready to bring the hammer down with the help of all of these brave people who have come forward, whose stories are what is going to really be compelling, okay? So there's that. And then I've got upcoming content showing screenshots of body brokering, which is very much still a practice in 2025. Got a video coming up about how to identify body brokering when it's happening, to identify agents who are pretending kind of to be, they're hoping you assume that they're associated with the rehab, but really they're independent agents who aren't ethically bound to any accreditation board, or to they have shallow pockets. They're not likely to be able to be sued if they screw you over. So I'm going to talk about how to identify body brokers and how to get yourself legitimate help with placement into treatment or placing a loved one into treatment. So those are just 2 upcoming videos. I have a lot of other stuff, a lot of lighter hearted and more artistic stuff, some deep dives into specific chemicals and chemical categories. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for staying around. I can't tell you how much it means to me, especially as I'm going through this taper process. So truly, thank you for listening. Drop a comment and a like below if you have any thoughts or feedback or any knowledge of this type of situation occurring, on a wider scale. And until next time, thank you guys, and I'll catch you